Welcome into another episode of Making the Leap. We're so glad that you're here today. We are diving into the homeschool topic again, which is always a big hit with people when we bring this one up. We've talked about so many different options, and we kind of like try to weave back and forth among them all.
Yep.
But today, I was recently traveling, and I spent a lot of time with my family back in Chicago, where I'm from. And part of that, when I go back, is seeing my sister's family. And she has 3 kids, one who is a little bit older, and then 2 who are out, and she's out of school. And then she's got 2 younger ones that are starting to, they're, I think, like a 3rd and 1st grade,
elementary,
school
early
level.
elementary.
Yes. And I don't want to label it because they homeschool. So she just kind of like meets them where they are with what they're doing. But she's been that experience of me watching them grow has been part of this journey.
Having never gone into a public school.
Correct. They have never started. She knew from, I think, early on that's the avenue that she was going to take, which is interesting because my niece, the one that's older, did private school. She was in private school through mid-high school, then switched to a public school for several reasons, did not have a great high school, private school experience, and now she's out. So they've run kind of the gamut on a lot of things. So but these little ones have never been in school.
Your sister was doing this before it was cool.
She was.
Well before we were thinking about it, actually.
And trying to pull me along. And several times over the last few years, last probably 10 years, I'm like, what? Tell me that again. I'm not sure, and she'd send me information and I'd look at it and think about it. And, I'd be pulling up like a Charlotte Mason curriculum and think I could do this, but would let myself be talked out of it by me. It wasn't like you were talking me out or anybody else. I came across in my head a lot of the stumbling blocks that we talk about. So
why?
I think nervousness was one. Knowing that I had 3
You're a trained teacher. I mean, you're a trained teacher. You literally went to school to learn how to teach people.
And I went to school to teach middle school language arts. I actually started as elementary and was like, this is not for me at the time, switched it. And then I, went to middle school. But I think I was stuck in that place of, I know what I know. And I was not in the place of, well, I can learn. I just was more like, this is my background. I don't know about the rest of it. And 2 boys and a girl, and older, younger, all the obstacles of, well, how do I manage all 3 kids? How do I set this piece up? That kind of thing. And selfishly, I think I always kind of had it in the back of my mind. And I am not proud of this fact, but I am fully comfortable admitting it. I knew I would be giving up some of my space and my time and my life to do it. And at the time, I wasn't there.
Well, let's be real.
So.
Let's be honest. How much of sending our kids to either a private school or homeschooling them is beyond financial? That's going to cut into a lot of my time. Let's just be stone cold honest about it. How much of that's more time than I care to give it, do you think? Well, if you were to be honest about it for a lot of people.
You mean if I was going to homeschool versus?
Not just you. I'm saying kind of the general population who probably knows there's a better way than public school, but giving over their free time or their own time to homeschool, not that they can't, not that they're not capable. They just think, oh, that's more of a time commitment than I want.
Oh, sure. Because there's no way I think with homeschooling, depending on how you set it up, maybe it's your morning, but then your kids are still there and I have errands to run and I have a dinner to make and I have groceries to do and I have to clean and I have to do this. Now, I know that that's where kids, you weave them in through all that, right? And I don't think that I felt like I had the energy to address all those different pieces every day, all the time.
Yep.
And if they went to school, if they got on a bus and they went to where they needed to be, and then came home, I had a 5-hour window that I could get the things done that I needed to do. I could, occasionally go out for lunch if I needed to go out to lunch. I could do the fun craft project because I'm still taking care of my home. Like those things were important. But the thought of the up in the morning till bedtime at night was tough. Like, that's a hard.
Tougher than teaching and then coming home and doing dinner and.
In retrospect, no, but I did not know that. I didn't think about that. I knew I had to leave teaching when we had our third, because I knew I was no longer an effective teacher and an effective parent. And I did make the decision at that point with you, nope, if something's going to give, it's going to be teaching. And I know there are people that do manage it just fine. 3, 4 kids, they go to work full time, they come home, they parent. I was not doing that well. And again, those were littler kids. And then all of a sudden they were elementary age. And I thought, well, there's so much that I have to, that I want them to know. And I'm not sure I can, that I can do that effectively for all 3.
But you know what I was thinking? To that point, for so many years, we took our kids socially on vacation or to events together all the time.
Right.
When I look back at our 3 children when they were little, really little, toddlers, elementary school, the 3 of them did everything together all the time.
They did.
But for some reason, when it came to education, that was too big a hill to climb.
Right.
And I'm including myself in that. I don't. It's just funny now. I'm not sure why I didn't see it as something that could be achieved.
Right.
But
but it still could be now. We really could. If I thought, no, this isn't working out for Anna, so to speak, for a daughter, I'd pull her, and I would feel, even though we're talking about a high school level curriculum at this point, which I know the least amount,
yep.
I feel 100% confident I could do it if we had to do that. If we decided that was the next best path or whatever. Part of that is just, I think, wisdom. You get a little bit more wisdom as you age.
Sure.
I think with parenting, you get a little bit more comfortable. She's our third. She's not my first.
Yep.
I have much more of a piece of, I'm not going to screw her up. Too bad. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that as a young parent. And we were wrapped up. You had a career. I was leaving a career. I was, focused on how am I going to, I don't know, to feed my soul. How am I going to be my own person? How am I going to, those things, and they don't matter as much as I thought they did.
Pretty self-involved.
Then. Right. 100%. And so I can admit that now, but it is humbling to admit that, right? Like we talk about that all the time. And I recently, today we're talking with a woman that has 3 young kids that she is homeschooling. I met her through my sister a few weeks ago. When I went back, I had this opportunity to go to a mom's night, hang out group. There are probably about 13 or 14 moms there.
Wow.
And normally, I do not always enjoy the large, giant groups of, women hanging around together.
Not without wine.
No, it's not my thing. And so it's not always my thing, I should say. And I didn't know any of these people except my sister. And I will tell you, when I walked in with her, this is her group that she does a lot of her outdoor activities with. She does her own homeschooling on her own, but then she does a ton of activities with this group of people. And I've been watching it with interest for years. I think my sister is actually one of the oldest ones in the group, not by a lot, but I think she's one of the oldest ones with younger kids. And then the age range of the parents, kind of decreases from there. But I sat in this room listening to, there was a whole variety of conversation, but when it focused on kids and activities and plans, I was in awe of what they are doing with their kids, that they're really focused on this idea of, you've got it. Our world is full of, technology. Our world is full of structure, and they make it a priority to make the outdoor opportunities a big focus. And they all do it in different ways. They don't all use the same curriculum. They don't all follow the same structure, practice, things. They all do their own thing in their homes the way they choose. But when they come together, they have, I think, really come to a great place of creating really authentic experiences for their kids. For example, I know they just were at the symphony. They took, I don't know, I'll say 15 kids. I'm not sure if I didn't count the kids in the picture, but they just took, these kids to the symphony.
But to your
locally.
point, it's a network of support for not just the mothers, but the children too. And so people that think, I got to do this, but I got to do it alone, I think this conversation today is going to show that you don't have to do this alone.
Right. And again, that is a place I think I'm at now that 15 years ago I was not at. I think it still existed, but you probably had to work a little bit harder to find what you needed. Yep. But I know that I could go online today and start finding these things. And I I will say too, this was something that came about a lot during COVID, when I was like, oh my gosh, these kids are on screens 6 hours a day. I've got to get them out, and we're going on a hike. And they were not thrilled, but we load up the dog, take the kids, and get outside, and it was better for them. And so I think watching this experience unfold for my sister has been a pretty interesting piece for me as a parent. So today I'm so excited. We have a guest that I have met very, very briefly one time and had the pleasure of speaking with her at a mom's night, which was a bunch of moms sitting around like a normal mom's night. But these were moms that had all come together for that had originally met, I guess, through a homeschool group. And so just to kind of continue some of our conversations where, we've talked about private school, we've talked about, pod school, talked about all the different models and things that are out there. We want to keep the conversation going about homeschool. So today we've got speaking with a woman named Kristin Wahls, and I'm super excited to have you on. Kristin, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, Kristin.
Thank you so much for having me.
We've been looking forward to this. I came home, so I spoke about this a little bit earlier in our podcast, but I met you a few weeks ago, and was just in awe of what were the conversations that were around me, and looking at all these people that had come together, basically through their kids. Met maybe each other individually, but had come together because of their kids. And as I listened to the conversations and watched what was happening, I really felt super comfortable just sitting there, not knowing anybody. And I think that's a really amazing piece of the homeschool journey. And before we kind of dive into that homeschool piece, I wondered, Kristin, if you could just share a little bit, about your kids, maybe a little bit about your family, how old your kids are, and kind of just what your homeschool journey, sort of, I guess, how it started. But we'll start just with some kids and basic information.
Yeah, so we live about 45 minutes outside of Chicago. I have 3 boys. They are 9, 7, and 4. And we had no plans to homeschool. This kind of snuck up on us. I had sent my oldest son to preschool starting when he was 2. So I was not one of those moms who was, kind of didn't want to let my child go to school too early. He was at preschool. So things were going fine at preschool until he was inching closer to kindergarten. And then I just started having these little nagging feelings. And in hindsight, it felt like God was kind of nudging me towards homeschooling. The first thing that started nagging me was I felt like they were really pushing academics really hard, even prior to kindergarten. They were trying to get the kids to read before they went to kindergarten, which just to me seemed so early because when I was in school, you didn't learn to read till you were in first grade.
Right.
And so it just seemed like too much too soon. He was coming home with worksheets to do for homework, which I thought was too much for somebody in pre-K. It was just, it seemed too academic, too much pressure. And then the other thing that started nagging at me was it was a half-day program, and so I would send my son in the mornings, and when he would come back, he would just have an hour or two where his emotions were just all over the place.
Okay.
He had to decompress after holding it together at school all day and trying to keep his, he's an active boy, so trying to keep his body calm and his emotions calm, and he would come home and just explode. And I felt like I was getting the worst of my son, and when he was at school, the teachers were getting the best of him, and that bothered me.
Sure.
And so again, just kind of a nagging feeling.
Okay.
Was
and
it
then the straw that broke the camel's...
I'm sorry to interrupt,
Sorry, go ahead.
was it the structure of the day that was causing your son such distress?
I think it was the fact that he was in such a controlled environment where he had to behave a certain way and not be active. He's a very physically active boy and kind of had to hold it together and hold his emotions in. And as a young kid, I just felt like that was too much for him.
Yeah.
When he came home, he just kind of exploded.
And so then when you said the straw that kind of broke the camel's back, what was that piece?
Yep. Okay, so for us, and I know every family has different feelings on technology for young kids.
Right.
And our family, we're very low tech, especially when the kids were younger. We just didn't do any screens. And I found out that in our public school district, and we had all intentions of sending our oldest to public school, they hand out iPads to every student in kindergarten, and that's their iPad to take home. And this bothered me, not only because they were putting iPads, using them for academic purposes, even when, we know for young kids that's not good for their brain at such a young age. But I also felt like it was kind of usurping my authority as a parent, because they would then bring this technology home and say, well, I have to do this for school. It's, and I would say, well, I don't want that in the house. And it's almost like the schools were making that decision for me.
Right.
And I didn't feel comfortable with that. And so at that time, that's when we started kind of researching alternative education.
Okay.
And concurrently, I just kept having these strange run-ins at random places like an airport where I would meet homeschooling families. And I didn't know any homeschooling families personally in our community or otherwise. And I just kept running into these families with these amazing kids. And I would get chatting with a mom and she would say, oh, we homeschool. And I was like, really? And that just kind of got the wheels turning that there was an option out there and really amazing kids. And they seem like they're doing really well and thriving. And I kind of said to my husband, why don't we think about homeschooling?
And what is your background? Do you have any background with teaching? Do you have any background with like any kind of school, piece at all?
No, I have zero teaching background. And it's interesting because in my homeschooling group right now, there's quite a few former teachers in it. And they actually have the most trouble transitioning to homeschool because it's just so different than a classroom environment. And they're so used to running their classrooms in a very managed, structured way. And homeschool is quite honestly chaos a lot of the time.
Right.
Yeah, let me ask you two questions then. Not to be negative, but I'm going to ask the negative questions that inevitably come when a mother makes the decision. I don't like all these screens. I don't like school rushing an agenda before I've made a decision. And now I think I'm going to take teaching under my own control. The outside world would say, well, you're not being very realistic. It's 2023. Technology is everywhere. You're bubble wrapping your kids. You're shielding them. And by the way, what do you know about teaching? I mean, I'm sure you heard all that. So what is your response to it?
Yeah, when it comes to technology, I mean, babies can learn how to operate an iPad. It's not hard. If we needed to have our kids learn how to use technology at some point, there wouldn't be a very steep learning curve.
Sure.
And I also think that by the time our kids are in the workforce, technology is going to look so incredibly different that even if they learn on an iPad at 5 years old, that's going to mean nothing when they're 20 and out in the workforce.
That's a really good point. Yep.
That didn't really matter much to me. In terms of the teaching, I started when my kid was going into kindergarten. So for me, kindergarten was kind of a low stakes situation. I knew I could teach him how to read. I knew I could do the basic elementary subjects. I know my kid better than anybody else. I love my kid. And so I knew that no matter what, I could handle that first year.
So I just want to establish quickly, and I don't mean to ruminate on this, but this is the hurdle. It's this step that's the toughest step, I think, because it's breaking with conventional wisdom and meeting the outside world and what is kind of traditional and challenging that. And I imagine you probably get in the early days, maybe not now, and maybe you didn't care. And if the answer is I don't care, I never paid attention, that's wholly acceptable. But did you get kind of, side eye, side glances, raised eyebrow? You're doing what now? Did you get any of that?
Well,
friends, family, or otherwise?
We did a little bit, but this was prior to COVID.
Sure.
And I feel like now in the post-COVID world, people feel very differently about homeschooling.
Yes.
And, it's almost championed in a way that it wasn't before. And because people went through periods of time with their kids at home, learning at home with them, it's so much more common now that I just don't feel like there's as much of a pushback as there maybe was prior.
I think that's probably one of those blessings too, that you did start pre-COVID, that it was, you kind of had your thing established before the whole world all of a sudden was launching into this whole new realm, including us.
Did you think welcome to the party when people started talking about it?
Oh, I was so excited. I was trying to bring friends on board because we started the fall of 2019.
Okay.
So that spring is when everything blew up.
Yeah.
And, I brought quite a few friends over to the homeschooling side. because they were really struggling at home, you know, because their kids were on computers.
Right,
because
it wasn't homeschooling. It was cyber schooling at home. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I was explaining to them, like, you could get your work done in just a few hours and have the rest of the day free.
Yes.
It's very different than doing school at home.
So what has always intrigued me, and Chris and I talked a little bit about this earlier, what has always intrigued me when I listen to my sister talk about things is this component, this wild and free, this outside education, outside learning type piece, which I think, first of all, is completely missing in most, if not all, public school settings. When I was subbing, when my kids were in school, it was, maybe 15 minutes 20 minutes for recess. That was it. I think the teachers tried to do their best. They tried to do what they could, but it just wasn't there. And so I wondered just a little bit, if you could just talk a little bit about what that wild and free component is, because I know it's an organization, kind of like the 1,000 hours, outdoors organization. I know it's that, but it is something that is across the country, and it's really valid because there's so much research behind it, and it's a great way, I think, to do a lot of education that isn't necessarily sit down, do some math, do whatever. Right. It's such a different piece. Yeah. So I wondered if you could talk.
Yeah, so there are literally, and just keep in mind, there are literally people listening to this that have no idea what wild and free is.
Clue.
They don't know what it is. Yeah. So talk to us like we're stupid.
Okay, so Wild and Free, there's actually an organization called Wild and Free. Their website is bewildandfree.org, I believe. And what they are is they're a hub that connects homeschooling moms with area groups. Or you can start your own group if there isn't a group in your area. And the point of these groups is to get these homeschooling families outside. So you all meet every week or every other week and go for hikes. So it's really for parents who homeschool, who place a high value on being outside in nature and want that for their kids. So that's how I met the majority of my homeschool friends, was through this Wild and Free group that was in my area, and I started attending the hikes. And what was beautiful about that is it started as just hikes every other week, and as our community grew and as we became closer friends, our community is now so many other things than just hikes. We do field trips, we do poetry recitation gatherings and nature classes, handcraft classes, folk dancing. So it started as just this time to appreciate nature and time for kids to just explore and have fun in the woods and be outside. And then that has just snowballed into something that's really become this beautiful community.
I know that's not what this is, but I'm curious. Could you then, this sounds like it could, if you chose, or if a group of you chose, this could evolve into something we've explored on this show before called Homeschool Pod. Like, you could pool your resources if you wanted.
Absolutely. And we've actually talked about this in our group because we kind of seem to be organically heading in that way. We have so many talented moms in our group who all have their own things that they're interested in. And, we have one who's really into nature and science, and she's done amazing classes for us. We have one that's teaching a clay class. And so if we all pooled our resources, we could essentially just have a co-op. And I think that's where we're heading.
I think that's fascinating too, because as I was at this Moms Night group that I got to just kind of witness for a few hours, I was really marveling as I was talking with various people about the different ages. So that's one of the things that I thought was very interesting, was that as I watched you guys kind of all interact the night that I got to kind of hang out with everybody, I was watching this talking with people who have kids that are young, kids that are in high school, kids that are about to enter high school. And that's something to problem solve, right? Like, that's got to be, I think it's different when you start with kindergartners, and then when you get a variety of ages, or you get a variety of boys versus girls, or now you've got kids that are clearly headed towards, math and science, and others are headed towards the English. I think that's such a cool piece of things, and you have to be seeing that. I don't, it's not a disparity, that's not the right word, but you have to be seeing that variety happening.
Yes. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I love about homeschooling. I remember one of my first play dates I had with another homeschool family. She came over, because with homeschool play dates, you don't just drop your kid off. it's a family affair. So everybody comes. The siblings come, the moms come. And so her oldest was 12, and my youngest at the time was 2. And so we had kids from 12 to 2 just all outside running around playing.
Wow.
And I just thought it was so beautiful because that doesn't happen very often.
No.
And the 12-year-old was helping the 2-year-old, and it was a really beautiful thing. And when it comes to our group and how we handle that, honestly, it's just moms helping moms. There's typically one mom who kind of will hang back with the younger ones and take control of them. My boys are out when we're on hikes. My boys are always at the front because they're really active, and so I kind of have to run up to the front, and then others will fill in elsewhere. So it really just is a community affair with moms helping each other.
What does the dad component look like for your group? I know every group is different, so I'm just curious on yours.
Yeah, I mean, we try to include the dads as much as we can. I think it varies family to family depending on the dad's work situation.
I mean,
how
I
much they
assume
can be involved with
a dad
homeschooling.
could be the guy, the primary. I mean, there's no reason a dad couldn't be doing it while mom's working, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we try to include our dads in, whenever we have family outings. We do a family camp out every year, which is really fun, where the dads can be included in some of our activities. And we even have a dad this year who's an actor who is directing our first play for the kids. Cool. So if the dads feel inclined to pitch in, then we absolutely love that.
That's awesome. I just think the whole concept is amazing. And I love that you started as like, let's just go hike in the woods. And now it's exploded, which I think for your group specifically. And I think that's what people are finding across the board is you start with one thing for one reason to do, one piece of it. And then it kind of morphs into what it needs to be, really.
What about people who say to you, oh, I could never do that. I could never do that. God bless you for doing it. That's wonderful. I could never. I'm sure you do hear
a lot.
that. And so what do you say to that?
I hear that all the time. And I honestly feel like if I can do it, anyone can do it. I did not foresee my life going this way, but I absolutely love it. And, if you want to do it, I know homeschooling is not for everybody, but if you have that desire and you want to do it and you feel like you're incapable for whatever reason, I just want to encourage you. You can do it.
But
I truly believe that.
May I just press on this a minute? Because here's the thing that just frustrates me to no end. I'm by no means an expert in this, and Christine and I are just really kind of getting into the conversation. So I people have gotten after me for sounding judgmental or preachy, but I just, gosh, it's taxing to hear people come up with excuses as to why it's just easiest to keep sending our kid to public school. And one thing I've learned is there are two. I know I sound redundant for people that are regular listeners. There are too many darned options. There are too many ways to go about this, and I'm kind of tired of this binary decision of it's got to be public school or some fortune of a private school, and there's no in between. I mean, your story is proof positive of that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How did you decide what your curriculum piece is going to be? So setting aside the outdoor piece, I think this is something else, and because I know it is, I think the homeschool environment is saturated with so many different options that fit every different kid in every different way. So how did you decide that piece of things in terms of curriculum for what you were going to be doing?
So it can be overwhelming because we're very fortunate in this day and age with the internet, and there are just so many curriculum options to look into. I think what was helpful is I think it was like an online quiz or something. What style of homeschooler are you?
Okay.
And that helped me narrow down kind of what philosophy I was looking for. Because there is a lot out there. There's unschooling, there's classical, there's Charlotte Mason. There's just a million different ways that you could look for a philosophy and then curriculum. Ultimately, what I landed on was, for me, Charlotte Mason, which is a type of classical philosophy. And I just really resonated with what she said about being outdoors. She recommends children be outdoors for like 3 to 6 hours a day and learning through literature and living books rather than textbooks and worksheets. And so once I kind of landed on that philosophy, then I could narrow down my curriculum options and find out what worked for me.
That's a good thing for people to hear because, I know, well, actually, that night that I was with all you guys, I did meet, there was a lady talking about all the ticks, like being outside and pulling off, all the different ticks from all the different walks and all the different things. And that's not for everybody. You either, adjust to it or you're like, no, thank you. That's not for me. But it's funny, like, because there really are, like you said, unschooling, Charlotte Mason,
Yep.
there are so many varieties of ways to go with it that it can be overwhelming, but at the same time, that means you're not limited and you're not stuck with a
Right.
one-size-fits-all premise.
Exactly.
Let's talk about, okay, you did this with young kids. And so people may say to themselves, well, that's fine for little kids. Little kids don't know any different. You bring them up in this, that's normal to them. I've got a 7th grader and 8th grader at home. I can't do what you've just told us you've done. What would you say to that? And then just kind of demographically speaking, from pre-K, kindergarten, first, second, third, elementary, all the way to high school, how does this play out in your head, or how would you talk to people with older children?
Yeah, I mean, my husband and I have thought about this quite a bit because I think it does change. The older the kids get, the more challenging the academics are. And the wonderful thing about the age that we live in is that there are so many options for those grades as they work their way up. I know my strengths and I know my weaknesses, and I will not be teaching the higher levels of math. Like, there's just no way. So I have no problem outsourcing that. And I don't know what that will look like. I don't know if it'll be a math tutor. I don't know if it'll be an online class. I don't know if it'll be a co-op class that's available somewhere. But the good news is there are all of those options. So
You don't see a scenario, though, where you fold and say, all right, kids, back to school, back to public school.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I know it's always hard to say never, but that's kind of your gut.
I never want to say never, but we're just so happy with what we're doing right now. And I have many moms that I'm friends with that are kind of like mentor moms towards me who have graduated kids, and they've done fabulously and are in college and successful. Right. And so I know it can be done.
Yeah.
That's true. I think that's important to know is that, or the other important piece is finding those people to connect with who have been down the road, have, here's how I met this obstacle, here's how I, changed this or adjusted this or think about this. I think those things are
I'll just share with you both. There's a woman that I know who was homeschooled as a girl, and now she has children, and she brought her kids up to a certain age, and then the kids started begging her to attend the local public high school again. And she ultimately acquiesced and said, all right, fine, and sends the kids to the public high school. I'm not faulting her for that. I think that's an interesting thing. I had never considered raising your kids homeschool, and then one day the kids say, I want to go be a part of the public school. I'm sure that must be a discussion in a lot of homeschool households, maybe more than we know.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you tackle that, but I guess you don't yet either.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to kind of establish your why. What is your reason you want to homeschool? Like, what is your vision? What do you see the point of education for your child? And you can kind of revisit your why every year and think, okay, are we going in that direction? Does this decision make sense for, what we want the outcome to be? But yeah, every family is different in terms of that path.
Do the kids buy in? Do the kids have to buy in? I mean, we're the parent, and we've done shows before where we've had some people pretty bluntly say, "You're the parent. They don't get a vote." I mean, this is a benevolent dictatorship, and I respect that. I do, and ultimately, the parent reigns supreme here. But is it important as the kids age? I'm just asking aloud. I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
Is it important kids understand why and what you're doing and have buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, I explain to our kids why we do what we do, and they're young, and they totally love homeschooling because they know that they have free time in the afternoons. They know how long their public school friends are in school,
right.
So they're thankful to homeschool. And I don't know how that will look when they get older, but I don't know. I feel like taking their opinions into account is important, just to weigh the situation. But ultimately, my husband and I will make the final decision.
Sure. Well, I have really, really enjoyed this conversation. It's something I I talked with my sister a lot about, a few times we kind of started to dive down, kind of move down that road and then, switched back. But I'm fascinated
I don't know
by
that we've
it.
ever, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't know that we've ever really told this audience that your sister is also part of this very same curriculum.
Right. Well, earlier when we were talking, when we started the podcast, we did. But yeah, you're right. Like, so that's a big piece.
But I mean, that's how our nephews are going through this program.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Before we let her go, I do want to talk a little bit about the faith component, because I know you wanted to bring that up, right?
Yeah, I did. I guess I was curious. You said early on when we started talking that you kind of had these God moments, that you felt like, just maybe just feeling something, hearing something, the coincidences of running into somebody. Where does faith come into play with this for you, or how does it come into play?
I think it comes into play completely because, I think discipling your kids, that should be our number one priority. And now that they are home with me all the time, that can be my emphasis. And just even talking about things like math or music, which don't seem like something that has to do with God per se, we're able to weave faith into that and say, well, look at these beautiful harmonies, and all of it is God's creation. And so I don't know, I love that we are able to speak freely about that at home and just weave our faith into every subject that we learn about.
And it's so great for them to hear that. I think just to, again, Chris and I talk about this a lot, just to have that background in a comfortable setting, in a welcoming place, and then having those discussions, especially as they get older. As you talk about, you get into your science and you get into your English, and, those are it's such a great way to in a foundation.
Is that something that comes up in conversation with you all as a group, or is that just kept exclusively? I know that there's no faith-based or religious litmus test to be a part of this group with fellow parents and their kids, but is faith a subject matter for the group, or do you stay away from that?
Well, we have people of all different faith backgrounds in our group, so that's not something that we talk about explicitly in a religious form, but we do talk about creation in general and how beautiful it is and how blessed we are to be within this creation. So, it's not specific to one faith.
Sure. Okay. No, I think that's wonderful. I really do. I just knowing that you, first of all, as you're getting, kids are outside and they're getting to explore. I mean, nature itself has so much wrapped into it when you talk about math, science, and the writing and the journaling and just the music, that kind of thing. I think there's so much there. I really loved it because I knew this was one place we just didn't dive into too much yet, and so I thought it was kind of time.
I love our action item here to close. People are listening to this. They say, this sounds really good. Where do I start? How would you, somebody listening to this and says, I think I'd like to try this, or I'm curious to know more. Where would you direct people?
Well, we've talked a lot about Wild and Free, which is a wonderful organization. So I would start there. If you are interested in finding community near you, a similar group of homeschooling moms, go to bewildandfree.org, I believe is their website. If you're interested, like I said, I'm a Charlotte Mason educator. If you're interested in learning more about Charlotte Mason and that style of home education, AmblesideOnline.org is a great place to learn more about her and her methods.
That's awesome. I really appreciate what you've shared with people today. I think there's just so much room for so many conversations, and having just the more casual ones that kind of just spark an interest, I think is a lot of why we're here, is just to make sure people know that it's just not a one size fits all. And if this type of pod school doesn't work, well, I can go find something else that does. And especially just using the technology that we have to connect with others is crucial. So I'm so glad you were able to take the time today to talk with us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Absolutely. I love talking with people like that, who do something that really, in our day and age, I feel like is out of the ordinary for regular people. Like the concept of 3 to 6 hours outside a day. I think a lot of people hear that and they're like, when? Because they're running, they're running all over the place. That's just an interesting It's just something different.
Well, I kept thinking to myself, I can't help it. I suppose it's a negative perspective, but I can't help but keep thinking that there are people who will hear that and think to themselves, well, that just sounds like playtime all day long, and there's no, and I'm not disparaging it, because I know it's not. I know how smart our nephews are.
Right.
But I think to someone who doesn't understand this sounds like it's just frivolous, maybe, or something, and it's certainly not.
No, and when I talk with my sister, for example, or when I'm because I'm on some of those websites too, I look at them a lot. First of all, the benefit alone of being outside is huge. That's huge. So just taking just that piece by itself. But then, I think about, there was a time I had a video sent to me of, our two nephews. Then they made, I'm going to butcher it up, I'm sure, but they made a little moving stream right in their yard. So they had rocks, and they had dug a trench, and they were pouring water, and they were watching it flow. Well, that's science. And so as long as you can come alongside that and start saying, why do you think the water is moving that way? What happens if you put a leaf here or a stick here? What does that mean? What does that do? That's where I think a lot of that learning comes into play, right? And then I also, for example, that night that I was sitting there with all them, they're talking about, I don't know, tapping maple trees for syrup, talking about, we're going to make pancakes, and everybody's going to bring their different maple syrup from their different trees, and we're going to taste test it. Or, this woman was talking about what the bark on the outside of the trees can tell us. And like she said, that you bring these people together who have this knowledge base. Now all of a sudden you've got science going on in ways you didn't know. And I think that's the kind of organic learning that a lot of people in homeschooling groups or unschooling groups, that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for it to look like a worksheet, sit, a test, homework. They're not looking for it. So it's almost, I think, as if you have to reach into your brain and pull out the traditional piece of things and look at it from a non-traditional point of view.
Well, I go back to when I went to college, and one of the reasons that I chose to go to a smaller Division II school versus a big school, the discussion was, now I was 18 years old at that point. I'd finished K through 12 public school, and everyone said to me, "Oh, Chris, if you want to work in broadcasting, you're going to need to go to a school that lets you do hands-on stuff right away. You don't want to go to a big school because it's huge and it's crowded, and you'll have to sit in a classroom setting, and you won't be able to do anything until you're like a junior. But your freshman year at this smaller school, you can start doing." And sure enough, my point in that story is it was my job, my profession, like so many others, values that you're physically doing the thing. That you're not that you're sitting there talking about it and reading about it. You're doing the thing.
Right.
So I'm not entirely sure why, again, we don't have that concept for younger kids. It's like once you hit college, it's hands-on, hands-on, hands-on. But K through 12, it's like, no, you sit in the class and you study from a book and you do a worksheet. It doesn't really make sense now that I think about it.
It doesn't. And that was part of the piece when I was leaving education. I felt like it was starting to shift, and it was much less of a, build the scene from the story that you liked. And instead it was, and you have to have both, but it was much more formulaic, and it was much more structured, and it took part of that connection out of things. Acting out stories. We would act things out all the time in my classroom. The unit that kids loved when I was teaching, reading children's books, writing children's books, playing games like kids, they all loved that. And it made them really better writers because we were up and we were moving and we were doing things and reading things that really sparked interest. And that's what I think a lot of this is about, is finding the way to connect, to have your kid connect with what's happening, to spark that interest.
Which makes me think back to, and this has nagged at me since we recorded our last show. You had introduced me to an email from a guy who said that I had mischaracterized a lot of people's decision to stay with public school for sports.
Right.
He said, no, not true. I've got kids that take advantage of, I don't know what it was, family and consumer sciences or something.
Yeah, right.
And I've been thinking about, my reaction to that, which I didn't particularly care for, and that was the idea that only public school can create for your child the lab setting to do the thing he or she is interested in doing. I don't know that I think that's true, and I regret that I didn't spend a little more time thinking about that. there's this attitude that only public school has the ability to create a setting where your child who's interested in cooking can learn to cook.
Right.
I don't think I accept that, actually.
No, and it's I think it's why we're doing what we're doing, though, because I think we have pledged and talked about sharing our own journey through this process. Well, what you just said, that is part of the process, right? Is kind of challenging a little bit about what we know, what we believe. Yes, we've got our daughter still in a structured environment, but who's to say that that's the way it's going to remain? I think we've got eyes on her much more than we did. And if we see an avenue that needs to be explored a little bit more,
we can change it.
We can change it, and I think we feel comfortable about it. And so I think you're right. You're right on that. That's something to continue to think about, and not just like we've been saying, don't settle for status quo all the time. And as always, like we just mentioned, email, you can always reach out to us via email, hello@makingtheleappodcast.com. You can contact us through Twitter, which is making_the_leap podcast. And Instagram and Facebook are at Making the Leap podcast as well. So any of those avenues will work.
Before we close out, we cannot forget about our very first, we're coming up on now one year. Yeah. 1 year of this podcast, and to celebrate it, those of you, and I know people listen everywhere, so you may not be able to get here, but if you happen to be anywhere in the area of the Herzog Foundation, on Monday, April 24th, we're recording a live in-studio Making the Leap with, hopefully, many of you that enjoy listening and have a perspective. We want to bring in some of our former guests, parents, students. I hope for, and I know you do too, a robust conversation with lots of people from lots of different places about their perspective. It's really just sort of meant to be a culmination of the last year. Hopefully a lot of familiar faces and new ones, and we just kind of talk about the experience. I think it'll be really great. I think it'll be fun. Yeah, totally free. Sign up. We're going to be putting out information about that. It's out now, actually. It is. I think they're going to be, we'll be putting out very specific information as well through all those venues, the Instagram, the Facebook, that kind of thing. The website. You have to RSVP. You do need to RSVP, but it is free, and there'll be like a kind of a appetizer, cocktail, 5:30 to 6. Yeah. So free food and drink. And then 6 to 7 will be the event. So not a huge time commitment, but definitely something that I think would be worth checking out. And it's first come, first serve thing. So we won't have a ton of room. So if that sounds interesting to you and you're anywhere around the area, again, that's what time start? It's a 5:30 open doors, and then 6 o'clock is the event. Okay. That's Monday, April 24th. Yes. 1 year of Making the Leap, thanks to you and your support. How cool is that? I love it. Well, even today is a perfect example, right? Like where you're kind of like, I hadn't thought about that, or I'm not sure I think that, and we're 1 year in. So I think it's, always learning, which is the point. We'll see you again next week right here. Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. Please rate and comment on the show, as well as subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'll see you next time on Making the Leap.